Then we have reflection, which is quite similar to specular channel. The difference is you can't get blurry reflection with the reflection section, and also it can't reflect direct light sources. Let me zero out my specular weight and increase the reflection weight to 1. Obviously, you can change the color of your reflection if you wanted to. So let me change and use a few color and try a few ones. Or you can control how much reflection you need using the weight. Then we have Fresnel, which works like the Fresnel in the specular channel. As I enable it, the very edges are very reflective and the frontal angles have no reflection, and by increasing reflectance at normal, you basically increase the reflection amount at the frontal angles. Also, we have this option called Enable Internal Reflection, which enable us to see indirect specular and mirror reflection computations when ray refraction depth is bigger than 0. To demonstrate this quickly, let me create a box and change its dimensions. Put it in front of these two objects. There you go, make it a bit smaller maybe. Now let's quickly create a gloss-like shader. So create a new Arnold Standard shader. Open it up. Let me zero out the diffuse. Specular weight to 1. Roughness to 0.15. Enable the Fresnel. Refraction weight to 1. IOR to 1.51. And enable Fresnel use IOR. Now let me apply it to the cube. Select the standard shader and get back to the reflection channel. As I enable internal reflections, we can no longer see the reflection on our sphere and abstract object when seen from the refractive cube. Let's enable this option and delete the cube and its refractive material also. Finally, we have exit color, which is the color returned when a ray has reached its maximum reflection depth value. Let me change this black color to something like red. Now you can clearly see when the reflection rays reach their maximum ray depth, we see this color that we defined here, this red color. In order to get rid of it, you need to increase your reflection ray depth in your render setting. So let's open up our render setting, and as I increase my reflection ray depth, you can see the exit color disappears slowly. In this case, something like 10 or 11 would be enough. Now let me change this color back to black. We also have use environment option, which for whatever reason doesn't work at the moment, and the way it is supposed to work, basically if enabled, it should show you the environment you have in the scene instead of the exit color. And honestly, it doesn't matter that much because you possibly won't use the reflection channel at all, and if you do, you would increase your reflection ray depth enough to make this option obsolete. I still don't get it really. I don't think there is any need to have a reflection section because we have the specular section. I mean, the reflection section is a bit quicker than the specular. So for example, if you wanted a perfectly mirror-like reflection, you use a reflection and it would be faster. But honestly, I think the machines are fast enough to handle the specular channel, and I don't think there is any need for the reflection. I mean, there was a reflection channel, for example, in V-Ray for Cinema 4D. A few version like here exactly, there were the specular channel and reflection channel, and they simply deleted the reflection channel in your version because there was no need when you can achieve the same result with the specular channel. I don't think the reflection channel is really necessary, but there you have it. If you wanted a bit quicker renders and mirror-like reflection, you can simply use this option if you want it. And now we have refraction. Let's unhide our gloss object. Let me delete the standard shader that we have been working on and create a new standard shader. change its color to this pinkish color and apply it to the sphere. Control drag this shader and create a duplicate. Change its diffuse color to the cyan and apply to the abstract 3D object. Now let's create a new standard shader and rename it to glass, and let's apply it to the glass object and open it up. Zero out the diffuse weight. Every refractive object have some reflection, so let's increase our specular weight to 1 and decrease the roughness to about 0.15. Also, let me turn on Fresnel so we have realistic reflections, and now come down to the refraction section. Obviously, whenever you want to create some sort of transparent shader like glass or water, you use refraction. First of all, let's increase the weight here to 1 and IOR or index of refraction to 1.51, which is the IOR value for most household glasses. As you can see, our glass has some refractive parts and some block parts. That is because we don't have enough refraction depth. Let's open up render setting window, come down to the ray depth section and increase refraction depth to about 4. And let me close the render setting window. Also, let's select the glass object and apply an Arnold parameter tag and uncheck the opaque option. This way the shadows cast from the transparent object will look correct, and if there was a refraction color set in the color section or down here in the transmittance section, the shadows will pick up that color also. So guys, to sum up, whenever you create a refractive object, disable the opaque option so it looks correct. Let's get back to the refraction section of our standard shader. First of all, you have color, so you can create colored transparent object, which is not recommended to use this option to create colored glass, for example, because naturally colored transparent objects like glass have different shade of a color based on the thickness of the different parts. Thinner parts will be tinted lighter, and thicker part will have darker shade of that same color. But right now the glass is colored evenly without giving any attention to its thick or thin parts. You can apply any texture you want also if you wanted to. Now let me change this color to the default white so we have a clean and clear glass. Then we have weight, which controls how much refractive your glass should be. There is the IOR or index of refraction, which controls how much light rays will bend as they enter a medium. This value is 1 for vacuum, so the light won't bend in vacuum, 1.33 for water, 1.51 for household glasses, for example 2.41 for diamond. You can find IR values for different materials on the internet, so if I change this value to 1, there would be no refraction basically. 1.33 would be like water, 1.51 would be like normal glass. Then there is the roughness, which control how much sharp or blurry the refraction should be. As you increase this value, you are gonna have blurrier refractions, so you can simply use this value to create something like frosted glass. Also, as a rule of thumb, when you roughen your refraction, you also need to roughen your specular reflection. Otherwise, you're gonna have sharp reflection over blurry refractions, which is not likely in real world material. Also, you can control the roughness using the texture. So I can open up my network editor, simply connect an image node and use one of my dirt pictures. As you can see, the wider part of the texture will make the refractive material to look more glassy, more blurry, and the black parts are gonna make the sharper and cleaner part of the glass. You can create some beautiful, nice effects, obviously, using this technique. Now let me come here and zero out the roughness parameter again. Then we have Fresnel use IOR. When you enable this, the Fresnel reflections would be based on IOR values. Let's enable it and change the IOR to 1. Now, as you can see, the Fresnel effect is very obvious. The edge of our gloss is more reflective than the frontal faces. And if I increase this value to something like 1.2, now the Fresnel is less obvious and reflections are more even from different viewing angles. Let's change it back to 1.51. Now the reflections are maybe more even compared to when it was 1.2, and the Fresnel is weaker. Then we have the transmittance, which controls the color of the light when it passes through a transparent shader. In a simple term, transmittance filters the refraction according to the distance traveled by the refracted ray. The longer light travels inside a mesh, the more it is affected by the transmittance color. So let me change the transmittance color to this green color maybe. As you can see, thicker parts are more affected by the color set in the transmittance color, and you can maybe try different colors and see the effect on your own. The next option is the opacity, which is exactly like the alpha channel in Cinema 4D. So it is not affecting only the refraction section of the shader, even though it is here, but it also affects all the different section of the shader. So this is a very universal parameter. They set it in the refraction for whatever reason. The reason is quite obvious because we're talking about the transparency and opacity, so the refraction would actually be the best part. Now, when the color is set to 1, and as I darken the color, the shader becomes less and less visible. To see the effect a bit better, let's zero out the refraction and the specular weight and increase the diffuse weight to 0.8. Now, by using darker colors in the opacity, the shader is less visible, and if I use a pure block color, the shader basically disappears completely. Like other attributes, you can control the opacity using a map. So let me open up the network editor, select the standard shader and press Ctrl Shift and T, and let's load our checker pattern image. Let me select the image node, and under UV coordinates tab, increase scale V and U to 5. Also, to see the pattern a bit better on the glass, select the texture tag applied to the glass and change its projection to flat. And if you take a look at the IPR, where the texture is white, the glass is visible, and where it is black, it is basically invisible. Let me delete this image node and close the network editor. Also, let's zero out the diffuse weight and change the specular and refraction weight to 1 again. Let's make sure our opacity and transmittant color are set to white. Finally, we have the exit color section. Let's change this color to something like red, and if I open up my render setting and decrease my refraction depth, you start to see the exit color because simply there is not enough ray depth, refraction ray depth. Let me increase my ray depth back to 4. Now we have a subsurface scattering. Let me close the shader and also hide my gloss here. Also, let me delete all of these shaders and texture tag except for this shader called ground. So we have a fresh scene. Let's create a new Arnold Standard shader, and let me rename it to SSS or Subsurface Scattering, and apply it to the sphere and the abstract 3D object. Open it up. Subsurface scattering is when the light rays enter an object and scatter beneath its surface. We discuss SSS or subsurface scattering more when we talk about skin shader. For the moment, let's come down to our subsurface scattering section, and as I increase the weight parameter value here, basically, the light rays will start to scatter beneath the surface of the object. First of all, we have color. As I change the color, we are changing the color of the scattered rays. To see the effect a bit better, let me reduce my diffuse weight to about 0.35. I can try a few colors here, and you can see the effect. Finally, let me just use this red color. We have the weight, which basically controls the amount of subsurface scattering, and as I increase it, we allow the rays to scatter further beneath the object and therefore seeing stronger SSS effects. Let me change it to about 0.75. We have radius. The radius of the area each sample affects. Higher values will smooth the appearance of the subsurface scattering. We have 3 radius amounts for R, G, and also B channels. Now let me show you a few renders with different radius amount. There we go. I have 3 renders with radius set to 1, 10, and 25. So basically, by increasing the radius amount, SSS can go deeper and the effect becomes more obvious. Let me set the SSS color back to white, change the weight to 0.5 and the radius to 5 centimeters. You can have different radius amounts for R, G, and B channels. For example, if I increase the radius of my R channel, I'm letting the red channel to scatter deeper compared to green and blue channel. Obviously, I can do this the same thing with green and blue channels if I wanted to. And you can see the effect in the IPR. Let's set the radius back to 5 centimeter. We talk more about subsurface scattering and skin shader in a very specific lesson. So let me zero out the SSS weight and also the diffuse weight so we can quickly discuss emission. Emission allows you to emit light from your shader. Now let me increase the scale to 1, and as you can see, we are emitting light from our shader. I mean, if you remember when we're talking about the mesh light in lighting section, we discussed the emission channel briefly, and we said that using this emission channel is not a good idea because it's noisier and it takes more time to clean it up, and it has no indirect contribution. So generally, when you want to emit light from a geometry, you can use the mesh light that we talked in the lighting section, but here you have this option if you want to. I can zero out my diffuse weight so we can see the effect of emission a bit better. The color parameter allows you to set the color of the emitted light. Let me choose this greenish sort of color. Then we have scale, which is the amount of the emitted light. If I zero it out, there would be no emitted light basically, and if I increase it, we emit more and more light. Also, you can use textures to control the emission. Now let me increase my diffuse weight to 0.7 and change the diffuse color to this purple. Open the network editor, select the standard shader and press Ctrl Shift and T and select color from the emission section and load .07. Select the texture tags for the abstract object and change its projection to cubic. And as you can see, where the texture is white, we get white light emitted, and where it is blocked, there would be no emission, and therefore we see our diffuse channel. And let's delete our image node and zero out the scale of the emission. We have caustics. Generally speaking, because of the Arnold's nature, which is ray tracer, it is hard to get crisp, sharp caustics. We have glossy, reflective, and refractive caustics. Let's increase the specular weight to 1 and enable glossy caustics. Also, let me quickly create a new refractive gloss shader. There we go. I can enable refractive caustics. Now let me quickly show you 2 renders with caustics enabled and disabled. In the first one, caustics are disabled, and in the second one, glossy caustics is enabled for the sphere and refractive caustics is enabled for the abstract object. And you can clearly see the caustic effect, which, as I said, it's kind of hard to get sharp and crisp caustics in Arnold to its nature, but it is possible if you want to have caustics, even though it is not quite possible, but it is possible. Let me close my picture viewer, delete the refractive material and its tag on our abstract object, and zero out the specular weight. Finally, we have advanced section, which is containing bounce factor parameter. Bounce factor is the relative energy loss or gain at each bounce. Using this option, you control the amount of GI generated by the shader. if I increase this value to something like 15, now this shader has 15 times more GI contribution, and you can clearly see the color bleeding increased in the scene as I increase this value. Now, 1 is the physically accurate value, and you should keep it that way unless you know what you are doing. But actually, it's a very useful option. Sometimes you just want more GI contribution from a shader, and you can simply increase the bounce factor for that particular shader. So basically, that is about the standard shader. It was a long lesson, but the standard shader is the most powerful and the most used shader inside Arnold For Cinema 4D. And that was about it. And I will see you in the next. Thank you for watching this tutorial. It was a free sample from our course Comprehensive Introduction to Arnold For Cinema 4D. Make sure to visit our website mographplus.com and check the entire course out. See you next time.